This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Isai. So, I hope everyone has their lifeboats packed. We're continuing on in the voyage of the Titanic. So, we spoke at the Gemara Yevamos, Kuf Chaf Aleph. The Gemara said a klal. The klal of the Gemara was Mayim she'en lahem soif loy tinasei v'yim niseis loy teitzei. That if somebody falls into endless waters, the woman may not get remarried. However, if she does get married, loy teitzei, she doesn't have to get divorced, from which we were medayek that the Isser of Mayim she'en lahem soif is only an Isser d'Rabbanan, and we said if it's only Isser d'Rabbanan, we may be able to play around and add other factors, namely, perhaps there's a svara like the Chassam Sofer mentions, the svara of if the person in fact survived with modern technology, and even in times of Chassam Sofer, telegrams and telephones, we would have found out about the person, and the fact that we have no evidence that the person died, that the person survived, must be that they died. That would add another roiv that the person probably died. In other words, a typical case of Mayim she'en lahem soif, most people don't survive. But here we could add an additional factor, and if they did survive, so why don't we know about them with modern technology? That's an additional factor. Although we did point out that Tosfos in Yevamos implies that even if there are two roivs, we're still machmer, because Tosfos says on the Gemara of Tzorba Mirabanan, Rav Ashi said that if the person who drowned was a prominent person, then you could be mekel, because if they would have survived, we would have known about it. But the Gemara falls off of that, and Tosfos says that even where there are two roivs, we are still machmer. Okay. However, last year we discussed the issue that the Mishnah in Gittin says that if a boat goes down, then not only could she not marry l'chadchila, but even if she does marry b'diavad, she would have to get divorced, which indicates that we're dealing with a safek d'oraisa. So we pointed out that the way the Rashba answers the question is that if you see a person drowning, that's when it's only midrabanan, you can't get married. But if she gets married, she could stay married. However, if you see a boat drowning, then we have very little indication that the person died. And in such a case, even if she remarried, she would have to get divorced. And we said because of that, the case of the Titanic would be a very difficult situation, because it's unlikely anybody saw the person go under the water. All there is testimony that they were on the boat, and a boat that drowns, a woman cannot even be remarried b'diavad. It's a very in other words, we would, in order to reconcile the Mishnah in Gittin with the Gemara in Yevamos, we would have to say that when a boat goes down, it's a safek d'oraisa. And we pointed out the Ramah paskins like the Rashba, that if all you see is a boat going down, even in this case, teitzei, if she remarries, she would have to get divorced. We mentioned that possibly the Rambam holds that if a boat goes down, the halacha would be that b'diavad she could remain remarried. The Rambam is only machmir as a safek d'oraisa if you see the oars and the appurtenances of the boat being destroyed. But if the boat itself is sinking, the Rambam implies that it would only be a safek d'Rabbanan, and that's the way the Rabbi Ashkenazi understands the Rambam. However, the Radbaz disputes that understanding of the Rambam. But the bottom line is, we don't follow the Rambam, we follow the Rashba, and therefore the case of the Titanic would seem to be a safek d'oraisa. But what I want to discuss today is a new twist to the whole saga, and that is the shita of the Mabit. Okay, so the Mabit adds in a major leniency here, and the Mabit begins in number 24. Okay, so the Mabit in number 24, Shal Shuvas Mabit, it's Simin Kuf Pei Vav, where the Mabit adds in two additional factors. The Mabit was Rav Moshe Mitrani, Rav Moshe ben Yosef Trani. He was born in Salonika, Turkey, which is now Greece, and in the year 1500, and he passed away in Tzfas on the 21st day of Nisan in the year 1580. He was a descendant of Rabbi Yeshaya Trani the first and Rabbi Yeshaya Trani the second, and his son was the Maharit, His son was the Maharit, Rav Yosef Trani, the famous Maharit, and the Mabit was actually one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yaakov Berav. Rav Yaakov Berav was the Rabbi of the Beis Yosef. Rav Yaakov Berav gave smicha, real authentic smicha, to the Beis Yosef and to the Mabit. And Rav Yosef Karo passed away. The Mabit, Rav Moshe Mitrani, became the Rosh Av Bezdin of Tzfas. So he was the Mamal Makom of the Beis Yosef. He was a contemporary of the Beis Yosef. And on this particular issue that we're about to discuss, there was a very heated, contentious machlokes between the Mabit and the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef disagreed vehemently with this psak of the Mabit that we're about to learn. And it appears it became personal. And there was some ill feeling between the two of them. And in the Tshuvas Maharit HaChadashos, the son of the Mabit writes that when Rabbi Yosef Karo was sick in his final illness, the Mabit went to visit him, and the Beis Yosef gave him a bracha. So apparently, b'soifai, they reconciled, but this became probably the most contentious issue between the Beis Yosef and the Mabit about the sugya of Mayim she'en lahem soif. Let me just speak out outside, and then we'll read a little bit inside. First of all, the Mabit brings the psak of the Mordechai. The Mordechai brings an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin. Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin was a Rishon. We don't know exactly who this Rishon is, but Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin makes the following diak. And the diak is, the Gemara says, Mayim she'en lahem soif, lo tinaseh. Endless water, she's not to get remarried. But we could be medayek, endless water, she's not to get remarried. Why didn't the Gemara say she lo tinaseh la'olam? She's never ever allowed to get remarried. It just says she's not allowed to get remarried. That implies that maybe the time will come after whatever 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then we say, you know what? If the guy's really alive, then where is he? She could remarry. Because why didn't the Gemara say Eloi tinaseh la'olam? She can never remarry. Why doesn't the Gemara? But the Gemara doesn't say. The Gemara just says she can't marry. That implies a time will come that we say, you know what? Enough is enough. Go get married already. And therefore, Reb Eliezer MiVardin says it's up to the Chachmei Hadar to say, you know what? By now it's reasonable already that she could remarry, and the Chachamim could do that. That's one heter that the Mabit brings down. And the Beis Yosef says, this is not legitimate. You can't be goyrei such a thing. We don't know who this... This is not an idea that could be even said over. See, the diuk is, the Gemara says, Loi tinaseh. The Gemara doesn't say, Loi tinaseh la'olam. That implies a time will come that she ultimately can get remarried. Here's the second idea, and this is the idea which is very noigea to the Titanic. Says a Mabit, when the Gemara says, Mayim she'en lahem soif, lo tinaseh, that's only if the person falls off the boat into the water. Because in such a case, maybe a wave took him to the other side of the sea. Maybe he chapped a board, he caught onto a board, and he is riding the waves. Maybe he fell into a fish barrel. But when the water comes onto the boat, and now the people are trapped in the boat, that's not Mayim she'en lahem soif. Now it's finite. Now they're in a limited area. Now this is Mayim she'yesh lahem soif. Now this is a very secluded area where how could they survive? There's no way to come out. They're trapped. They're on the boat. The water is gushing on the boat. Now it becomes a situation of Mayim she'yesh lahem soif. Then she could remarry. Now based on that, people who were stuck on the Titanic, say we said the third class couldn't get out, so maybe they don't have a din of Mayim she'en lahem soif. Yeah, it was the Atlantic, so it's Mayim she'en lahem soif. But in their situation, they can't get off the boat. Now the water is coming onto the boat. Now it has a din of Mayim she'yesh lahem soif, and then maybe they could remarry. So that is the chidush of the Mabit. And let's take a look a little bit inside. We'll try to read some of the tshuvas. And this is an issue that the Beis Yosef disputed vehemently. Let's begin with number 24. Yeah, on both points. Beis Yosef disagreed vehemently with both points. Both the Shita of Eliezer MiVardin, that a time will come that she could remarry, and the point that if the water comes on the boat, it becomes a situation of Mayim Sheyesh Lahem Seif. Beis Yosef disputed both points. Now, usually you would think we would follow the Beis Yosef over the Mabit. But we'll see almost all the poskim bring in the Mabit as a factor to be mekel in situations of agunais. Okay, so let's see number 24. This is the Chiddush of the Mabit. Okay, so let's see. Says the Mabit Ma'aseh Shahaya, there's a story. Bekama Yehudim Shalu B'Sfina Gadol. Many Jews went on a big boat. Shahaya Bakama Meos Yishmaelim. There were hundreds of Arabs. V'Rayva Anashim HaSchayros Hayu B'Cheder HaTachtoin Shal Asfina. Most of the people and the merchandise were on the bottom floor of the boat. We're in number 24 on page 4. Shehi Tachas Hamakim Shadarsim by Bali Asfina. They were sort of on the bottom level, under the place where the sailors would be walking on, the Hamalachim. Vein Makom Pachais Pasuach Ela Pesach Echad Bedelas. There was no way out except for one door. Shemimenu Yardim Va'olam Lamala. That through it, people would go down and up. Kishadalas Pasuach, when the door was open. Okay, so basically there was, the under part of the boat, and on top of that, the sailors would be walking on the deck. Vayhi Sar Gadol Bayam. There was a big storm. Bepesa pisam suddenly v'nevcha asfina derech tzida ha'echad. The boat tilted on one side. V'schila ma'im le'kanais. The water started going onto the boat. Vayu gimel eidal Yehudim im ksas Yishmaelim lamala. There were 3 or 4 Jews with some Arabs on top. Uchsharosh asfina hasin edbas. When they saw the boat was drowning, pascha Yehudim ha'pesach shel ha'cheder. The Jews opened the door. V'dibru la'achim sheb'cheder, and they spoke to their brothers in the room. V'him ha'boichim. They were crying mischanim lakel and beseeching God, MiVardin. They said, Vidoy bebechia zem zeh. They were all crying, bechadra. They saw death in their chambers. Umiyad nebcha asfina darach tzida. The boat turned on its side. Vanoshim shay besfina lamala naflu bayam. And the men who were on the top part of the boat fell into the sea. Bahayu shatim svivais asfina. They were swimming around the boat. So in other words, whoever was on the deck fell off, and they were swimming until they climbed on the walls of the boat. The whole boat turned over. And they were riding, so the whole boat turned over, and some people who were on the deck were able to get out. They swam, and they then jumped onto the bottom of the boat, which was now on the top. And they were there about a half hour. And slowly, the boat began to sink. Ad shenitva b'makayma, until it sunk in its place. Shehichbid masa. Basically, it absorbed, the water entered the chambers, and now the boat began to sink. Nobody knew where the boat sank. In other words, the boat sank in its place, and they couldn't access it on the bottom of the sea. The men who were on the deck, who were then in the water and resting on the bottom of the boat, found the lifeboat. But v'rubam nitbu. Most of those people drowned. Uktsasam alu l'sfina. Some of them got onto the lifeboat. Uv'chlalam nimlatu beis Yehudim b'sfina aktana. Among the Jews who made it onto the lifeboat were 2 Jews. Be'echamehem higia pai. One of them came to me. V'higin masha kasav lamala. He told me the above mentioned story. V'shekal anoshim shayu lamala b'sfina. And all the people were above on the boat. Shlohi sigu sfina katana nitbu. Meaning, basically what happened was, whoever was on the deck fell out into the water. Many of them tried to climb back onto the top of the boat and then into the lifeboats, but most of them drowned. And he saw them sort of floating on the face of the water. Uvechlalam gimel Yehudim, especially 3 Jews. And afterwards he was told that they floated dead on the water. La'ai shayo, v'kivram sham, and they were buried. So in other words, some Jews made it on the lifeboat, some Jews did not, and they were reported, and there was testimony that they drowned. Aval haYehudim shayu b'toich hacheder amar, But whatever Jews were in the chamber of the boat, he was told, as soon as the water entered the boat, he would assume they died. There's no way out. There was one door going to the bottom chamber. The water came gushing in, and he would assume whoever was there died. The boat overturned, and it fell face first onto the seabed, and they did not see any human, lo yishma, lo Yehudi, not an Arab and not a Jew, able to get out. In other words, not only did they not see anybody come out alive, they didn't see anyone come out dead. There was one entrance, the water was rushing in, and nobody was able to come out. But he would assume kulam haya b'cheder b'kanes hamayim. They were all in that chamber when the water entered. And therefore, we need to think about those people nebuch who are in the cheder. Do we judge that as mayim she'en lahem soif and their wives cannot remarry, or do we say no? Now it becomes mayim she'esh lahem soif and their wives could remarry. So says the Mabit. Venera shanu chalahoyros heter min hashaysein. In my opinion, you could matter their wives to remarry. Why? Shal elu she'utaycha chedra. V'lo have b'chlal demori b'mayim she'en lahem soif kumoy shenafarish. This is not like someone who paskins that mayim she'en lahem soif loitinase. The Gemara says, and the Shulchan Aruch says, that if somebody matters mayim she'en lahem soif, we put them in cherem. So says the Mabit, I would not say this is like that case. Because he says like this, even by mayim she'en lahem soif, the Mordechai brings, Kasav HaMordechai, in a tshuva, that Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin diktek the mayim she'en lahem soif ishtay asura v'loi ka'amar asur la'olam. Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin does not say she's asur forever. Shema, says Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, the lav la'olam ka'amar. Maybe it doesn't mean forever. The Gemara just says the woman is asur, but it doesn't say the woman is asur forever. V'chein nira. So it says Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, Shetalu Rabbi Sai Olav Shalom Al Chachmei Hadar, that our Chazal place it on the sages of the generation, V'yirei Shamayim, and the God-fearing sages, Sheyiskavnu, they should look deeply into the matter, V'yaskilu ala inyan, and comprehend the subject, Hamu'ura ba'adam, V'herech mo'id limtzei alila l'hater isha. And Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin will look for a dispensation to allow a woman, Shemas Agna Dalet Shanim, who was in Iguna for 4 years, ki nitva bala, that her husband drowned, v'chazakos mechicha shenitva, with very strong indications that he, in fact, did drown, ki akelim asher ois ita besvina nimtzu al sasayam, because we found whatever vessels he had with him washed ashore, and we never found him. That would indicate he died. Says the Mabit, harei sheyesh makom v'chiyuv al chachmei hadar. From here we see there's an obligation on the sages of the generation to look deeply into the matter, even by mayim she'en lahem soif. That's Ershtins. That's the first thing that we see from here, that even by mayim she'en lahem soif, if you have substantiation that you really think the guy is dead, you need to look for a leniency, because the Gemara doesn't say asura la'olam. The Gemara just says she's asura. Kol shekain, certainly kishaloi tiyah ha'ira b'chlal mayim she'en lahem soif, when it's not a case of mayim she'en lahem soif. Why? K'goyin b'nidan didan. Because we learned in the last parak of Yavamis that if someone falls into mayim she'en lahem soif or yesh lahem soif ishtay asura, but says the Mabit, aval heicha shlei ra'u shenafel ela shro shabo hamayim alav. But if you didn't see that he fell in, but rather the water came onto him, ki hacha, like here, shahayu toicha cheder, they were in the room, v'nichnesu hamayim b'toicha, now the water came into the room, loi hava b'chlal nafel hamayim she'en lahem soif. This is not a case of mayim she'en lahem soif. So says the Mabit, and this is muchach in the Braisa that the Gemara quoted. There, Gamliel said he was once on a boat, and he saw another boat that was drowning, and he was very upset because he knew Rabbi Kiva was on it. And this implies, and he said, Kama gedoyla divrei chachamim who say mayim she'en lahem soif ishta asura. But says the Mabit, that implies Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, that's when the boat breaks and he falls into the sea. But if the water comes onto the boat, that's not Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, that's Mayim Sheyesh Lahem Soif, and Ishtay Mutaras. And another proof, another argument, you could say, V'yesh Laharas Heter V'zev Loymar, that the guy for sure died because the onlooker waited long enough that whoever was there would have died. He didn't see him come out of the room. And it's like a case of Mayim Sheyesh Lahem Soif. V'oid Yesh Lahem Soif Tzad Heter, another argument you can make. Shelo Yatsu Misham, because think about the following. They saw death was approaching, and this is what the testimony was. And they were crying. They didn't try to get out. When they saw the water was coming on, why didn't the aide say, "Oh, we saw they were trying to get out of the door and jump out of the door"? And he didn't say that. What did he say? That they realized the room was going to be their grave. And they were saying vidoy, right? And part of the testimony was they didn't want to be eaten by the fish because they were crying a misvada in the room. Why didn't they try to get out? Tarot says they didn't want to get out. They would rather die there and be buried than come out and be the dinner of a shark or something. So that's another indication that they're probably there. And another haichacha that they didn't leave, because whoever was on the deck, when they saw that the Sfina was turned over, now the boat was turned over because the water entered. Now obviously the water entered, otherwise the boat would not have flipped. The only reason the boat flipped is because there was so much water in it, so now it was being weighed down. Okay. So mima nafshach. If the door was closed, they can't get out. And if it was open or they opened it, then the water would have drowned them. So it must be, says the Mabit, that is where their kever is. But he says life to the rest of Israel. In other words, this should never happen to anyone. And this is the conclusion of the Mabit. And what I'm saying is not theoretical. I would rely on it lahalacha. If you could get another 2 rabbis to support my decision, then you could, I'm not writing this theoretically, I'm writing this lamaisa, but get another 2 rabbis, and then you could go ahead and get married. It says, Na'um Hatzar, these are the words of the young man, the youth, Moshe ben Rabbi Yosef Mitrani. Now, at the end of the tshuva, he brings that another rabbi, Avraham Shalom, signed on my psak. Even though I'm not a posek, says Ramesh Mitrani. No, excuse me. Ramesh Mitrani says that Rabbi Avram Shalom also signed on to my psak, and Rabbi Avram Shalom wrote, even though I'm not a mi bale hara, I rely on whatever was written above. So Rabbi Moshe Mitrani said, don't rely on me unless you get the signature of another 2 chachamim, and he got the signature of 1 more chacham. That is tshuvas in Siman Kuf Pei Vav. In Siman Kuf Pei Zayin, the story continues. Achar shtei shanim, after 2 years that shehitarti ishazu, that I mattered this woman, but I said you need to wait until you get another 2 chachamim. And says Rabbi Moshe Mitrani, I was only able to get 1 other person to sign on. So what happened? Meanwhile, she's stuck. So what happened was Balafanai Ish. A man came to me. V'darash meni shahayarotzu lisana. A man wanted to marry her. He said, she's 2/3 mutter, so she's roiv heter. And he wanted to marry her. And I said, I can't, because I only mattered it if you get another 2 chachamim. You need to get another rabbi and to see if he's maskim. And he said he went. And no rabbi wanted to be mevatel their learning, to get involved in the issue. And to be ma'ayin into the heter, except for Rabbi Yosef. The only rabbi who would get involved in this, besides me and Rabbi Avram Shalom, was Rabbi Yosef. Which Rabbi Yosef? Rabbi Yosef, Yishmerenu, Tsuri v'gayali. The only problem is this Rabbi Yosef, who is none other than the Beis Yosef, he said, I looked into it and you're wrong. He threw the guy out. He said, get lost, you can't marry her. So basically, the Beis Yosef threw the guy out. Then, after many months, about a year later, another guy came and he asked me, okay, he doesn't want to marry her, so I'm going to marry her. I pushed him off for many days, b'taina ha'echad, with a certain reason. And I myself went around to different rabbanim to see if they would agree with me. V'loy shamu elav lihitapel. Nobody else wanted to get involved. The Inyan. Then I told him, Sheilach l'chacham k'Rav Avram lahaskim Heter. Go to Rabbi Avram to see if he's maskim. In other words, I can't tell you on my own to marry her. Go back to Rabbi Avram. Rabbi Avram was the first chacham who agreed with the Mabit. And if he allows you to marry, I'll maskim. So two of us together will be maskim. Rabbi Ram said, I can't give you permission until your personal rabbi allows it. The man went out beroiges, he went out fuming. And he took two edim, and he said, that's it, I'm just going to marry her. These rabbis can't get their act together. This rabbi says go to that rabbi says go to this rabbi. He just married her. And the Beis Yosef found out about it. And the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef, when the Beis Yosef discovered this, Shalach lahachriz es ha'isha, he sent to proclaim about the woman, al sha'omer hisraba. He made a proclamation about this woman that he said, that he warned her, Kama yamim shloi tinasei va'avra al hasra asai. In other words, the Beis Yosef said, put up signs that this woman violated my psak. And I told the Beis Yosef, Ani amarti she'asar shloi kedin. I told the Beis Yosef he didn't act properly. He didn't do properly by warning the woman not to remarry. Ki ein bezin chayom lahasas isha shetava bala b'yom ma'im shem shloi tinasei. Even though the halacha is a woman whose husband drowns in Mayim Shein Laham Soif cannot get married l'chadchila, but Bezdin doesn't have to warn her not to get married l'chadchila. That's a halacha. She shouldn't remarry, but Bezdin should not go out of their way and say, by the way, hey lady, don't remarry. And I told the Beis Yosef, don't warn the woman not to remarry. That's the halacha, but don't warn her. Umasha amru shalei tinasehu im tishal. The halacha that a woman's not to remarry is if they ask us what to do, we're going to tell them, don't remarry. But that we should go out of our way and warn her not to remarry, we shouldn't do. So here you see the story is brewing. That the Mabit was not happy that the Beis Yosef warned this woman. The story continues. The Kasav and the Beis Yosef wrote that the tshuva Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, you can't rely on it. The dvarav betela me'atzman. We don't have to upschlag it. We don't have to challenge it. It's inherently flawed. V'ani koyev u'mitzdar. I was very upset, says the Mabit. Al she b'sibasi zilzulu b'divrei zal. That because of me, the Beis Yosef disparaged Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin. Harav lemish dvar betela me'atzam. V'shebederach alila ala aliboy lahatir. And the Beis Yosef said that the Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin was wrong in creating a heter. It's a zilzol to say this about anyone. Koshike and the Rav Kadmon, especially about an early authority. How could the Beis Yosef speak this way about Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin? On the fourth line on page 5. Lifgoim kvoid tzidkasai bekever. To infringe on the respect of this tzaddik who's in his grave. Now who is he? Says the Mabit, Kivan shehevi dvar of Harab HaMordechai. If the Mordechai Mordechai was nifter in the year 1298. He was the Talmud of the Marami Rothenburg. If the Mordechai brings down the Psak of Rabbi MiVardin, Nira Shaya Rav Mefursam, he must have been a well-known rabbi, Ubar Samcha, a reliable rabbi. V'chein Rav Avram Bar Moshe Kasav Kach. Even our contemporary, Rav Avram Bar Shalom, he permitted this woman to remarry based on Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, but he didn't want to do it on his own. K'maish shekasav Rabbi Avram shenira shleichilku v'leibalus v'arav mipnei shahaya Rav Gadol. It's Rabbi Avram Bar Shalom respected Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, but he didn't want to just rely on it. But says Mabit, it troubles me. Ve'chiyala ala leiv. How could it arise in someone's heart? Levatel dvar for the Beis Yosef just to dismiss Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin. And now, so you see, it's becoming a very contentious issue that the Beis Yosef summarily dismissed Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, and the Mabit was hurt by that. He's a Rishon. We don't know exactly who he is, but he's quoted by the Mordechai. And the Beis Yosef, and the Mabit said, I'm not happy the Beis Yosef warned the woman not to remarry in the first place. Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin on two things. First of all, Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin that even Mayim she'in lohem soif, a time will come that a woman could remarry. And secondly, when the water comes on the boat, it becomes Mayim she'esh lohem soif. Now, he only wanted him out originally with two other rabbis. He was only able to get one. Couldn't get the third. Finally, he relented and he said, if you get Rabbi Avram Shalom to give the go-ahead, we'll do it just me and him. In the meantime, the guy was just, I can't take it anymore. And he got married. And Beis Yosef was publicized the wrongdoing that they did. And the Mabit wasn't happy about that. You know, who said that a Bezdin should go ahead and warn a woman? Okay. Now the story continues a little further. Siman Kuf Peites. Masha Haresi Heter Be'isha. Back to the Mabit. That which I permitted a woman. Aguna Zeh. Shnayim Hevesi Raya. Kiesh L'tzadei L'chapes Al Heter Agunas M'nei Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin. There says Mabit, this which I invoked Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin to try to look for a kula, and Rav Yosef, the Beis Yosef Chalak Alai. V'lohaya Rabbi Einai Ki Yemasha Chalak Al Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin. V'al HaRabbi Avram Bar Moshe Messiah. And the only thing that really bothered me was the fact that he just dismissed Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin and Rabbi Avram Bar Moshe, who supported Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, and he said that Devar of B'Telem, and you can't even entertain it. Ein roil halosim alev, and even more than that, V'al ha'achar amar shedvar temuim v'chshivim le'efes v'tayu. The Beis Yosef said his words have the following value: zip, zilch, 0. Vani nosati tuv tam v'das behem. Ba'ashivi al kol hasagoysav. Says Mabit, I defended Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, k'may she'yer misham, v'chadei she'yedu sha'ar chachamim, and in order, says the Mabit, to sort of substantiate my standing in the eyes of the other chachamim, ani koysev ma'aser shaya echaya. I'm going to write the following story. Now says the Mabit, what the Beis Yosef did, I cannot be dan him l'kav zchus. He says, "Ve'eni yachal ladon oisel l'kav zchus." Why? Ki haya maspik sheyomer shaloi hoisel mutar sladaita. You know what the Beis Yosef could have done? The Beis Yosef could have said that in his opinion, it's not mutar. V'loi hispik loi zeh. That wasn't enough for him. Ela shedarash b'fnei kahal ve'eda. The Beis Yosef went ahead and he darshaned. Shayachilul Hashem. The Beis Yosef said, anyone who follows this psak, my psak, Moshe Mitrani's psak, and the psak of Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, it's a chil Hashem. And v'harisas ha'toira masha asisi. And the Beis Yosef said that which I did, the Mabit, was a destruction of the Torah. Beheter isha aguna. Just very quickly, we're bringing down a machlokes that even though the Gemara says Mayim she'in lohem soif, you're now to remarry, there is a das yachid, a shita of Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, that the Gemara doesn't say she's never allowed to remarry. So there is a position that there is a timeline, and when the Chachamim see fit, she could remarry. And this is an idea that Beis Yosef dismissed very strongly. And the Mabit who defended that psak was very insulted by it. Because why did the Beis Yosef have to say that if you follow that, you're a Mechal Shem Shemayim? He could have just said, I don't agree with it. V'lo yoid. Eliezer l'shoynoi neged oisi, he spoke harshly against me. And he spoke harshly against Rabbanan that bring the Mordechai. And he said that the words of the Mordechai are betelem and ein roy salhas halev. And I found, says in Mabit, I searched and I researched, who is Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin? Umatzasi kizeh haya Rabbi Eliezer haya mibalei hatoisvis. That Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin was not some rabbi. He was one of the balei hatoisvis. Talmud Rabbi Yitzchak. K'may shehevi by dvar v'amordechai mesach shvuos. The Mordechai quotes him in Masechta Shvuos B'dinei Mikvais, and he's quoted by the Rakeach. V'yavki hu lo haya yodeazeh. And even though the Beis Yosef didn't know that Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin was one of the balei hatoisvis, but still, lo haya min aroy lachlek al devrayim kivin sheyadu shem chacham kamoinim. He shouldn't have just dismissed him. He knew he was an early rabbi. Yiyu mashiyu, whoever he is, certainly to write about him what he said. I don't know how he was allowed to do that. If he would have really understood Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, lo haya makshim aleh maksha hiksha. And therefore, it is my opinion that the Beis Yosef is obligated to get up in his kehila and ask public mechila for being poigeya in the covet of this rishon. He should ask me mechila. He should ask mechila on behalf of all these chachamim that he disparaged. And I asked the rabbis to look into the fact that the Beis Yosef was trying to put me down because I always showed him respect publicly and he was mezalzel in me. So here, probably one of the most contentious issues that the Beis Yosef ever faced. And you would have expected, look, at the end of the day, this is the Beis Yosef, and we would follow him over anybody else. But as we're going to see, Kemat, all the Poskim quote Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin as an additional heter. In other words, whenever they deal with an eguna, so the way they write their tshuvas is they look for heterim, and they add any heter they could possibly find, and they always add the heter Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, even though the Beis Yosef dismisses it. So, for example, in Rav Moshe's tshuva, if you look at number 34 for a moment, Rav Moshe you could find it. He says, in the second to last paragraph, Rav Moshe says, "V'gam hayei shita Eliezer MiVardin that ma'im shein lahem soif achar harbe shanim, it's mutter." And even though many argue, it's a shita of the Rishonim, and you could add it to the equation. So, despite the fact that the Beis Yosef vehemently dismissed this, it is a heter which is reckoned with and is used. Do I have 10 more minutes?
Yeah, well, time you want.
Okay, fine. So I'm going to read to you now the position of the Beis Yosef. In the Shas Tshuvas Beis Yosef, in the Hakdama, he brings there that this is one of the most contentious historical disputes in the life of the Beis Yosef, and how the Beis Yosef really vehemently oppose this. By the way, just point out the Chassam Sofer and his Tshuvas in Even HaEzer, Chelek Aleph, Siman Tzadi Beis, and the Achiezer of Reb Chaim Ozer Grzinski, Siman Yud Zayin, they both used Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin as an additional heter to be meikal. Now this is without, let me just add one more factor here, and that is another kula that we mentioned from the Mabit, is that even though Mayim she'en lahem soif, she's now to remarry l'charchila, but the Mabit svara was, that's when the person falls into the water. But when the water comes onto the boat, that becomes like Mayim she'esh lahem soif, and we could assume the guy died. So there's a difference between a boat that drowns and the people fell into the water, where there's a possibility maybe they were saved, or if the water comes onto the boat and they're inside, where we assume that they died. So let's just read number 27. Le'achas haboyis hachashuvas b'Yosef. This is the introduction of Shal Shachuvas Beis Yosef. One of the most prominent issues, B'dinei Agunos, in Aguna, in the arena of Aguna, is the Shaila of Mayim Shein Lahem Saif. And in the Sefer Shal Shachuvas of the Beis Yosef, there's an entire section dedicated to the exchange of letters between the Mabit, Rav Moshe Mitrani, and the Beis Yosef. And here he brings down the story that we read already. And in the next paragraph, Havikuach Nosav, the dispute was centered around the Chiddush, that one of the Rishonim, Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, was Mechadesh, who's quoting the Mordechai, that from the fact that the Gemara doesn't say Asura La'olam, that a time will come that it's up to the Chacham to say, okay, she's allowed to remarry. And with additional Heterim, you could add this Heter to the equation. And the Mabit, in the bottom paragraph, accepted the Sar of Rabbi Eliezer MiVardin, and he expresses his das to be mater, on condition that you get a few rabbis to agree with him. And he was able to get the Heter of Rav Ram Shalom. However, Maran, the Bet Yosef, the Beis Yosef, said, Dinam shal eila hu kedin nafal amayim she'en lahem soif mamish. This halach is the same as mayim she'en lahem soif, and their wives are asur linaseh, and it could be that their wives are even asur to marry midai raisa. Now, why would it be asur to marry midai raisa? Because we said that if the boat drowns, then the Rashba says it's a suffix dairaisa, unless you see the guy drowning. And the Maran added that this is not my opinion. Every rabbi in the city agrees with me with the exception of one. Now you could imagine all those rabbis who the guys, these people went over to support the Mabit, they probably didn't want to get involved. Mabit says mutter, Beis Yosef says asar, they probably wanted to stay out of it. He says the Beis Yosef said, now when one person went and married one of these women through the Heter and the Mabit, the Maran renewed his efforts and he made a gzeira that the person who lived with her is chayav achatos, and the Beis Yosef said the children that she will have with this man are mamzerim. That's how far he did not accept the Heter of the Mabit. Now, well, he is. The only thing is, why isn't he Chayav Misa? Could be he's a shoygeg because he was Soymech on the Mabit. But a Chatas he's Chayav, and the children are Mamzerim. And the Mabit did not backtrack. And he says, even if those who are Machmer, but B'diyeved, Mayim Shein Lahem Soifim, Niseis, Loiteitze. So the Maran said, no! Says the Beis Yosef about the Mabit, who ba l'rdoisenu b'toich beisenu, v'lich b'shimanis amako bayis. Beis Yosef said the Mabit is trying to destroy the Torah, and he's trying to break halacha, and he's being mater and eshasish. And the Mabit said back to his defense. He says, I matered her after 2 years, and I waited for 2 other chachamim, but I was only able to find one. But if the rabbis don't want to get involved, I said, I will matter it as long as Rabbi Avram Shalom agrees with me. Shalom es yazmusay shamaran lahasisba. Es yazmasay shamaran lahatroisaba shaloi tinasei umikimin shenisis loi teitzei. The Mabit sort of ignored what the Beis Yosef said not to marry. And here we have a tshuva. The Beis Yosef brings the tshuva of the Mabit. We also have the tshuvas of other Gedolim. The Rashat al-Farji and the Ri al-Chamasi. And they basically asked the Mabit to be Mevater. And they tell the Mabit like this. They say, we remember that in the olden days that they were better than us. People were not so stubborn, and they would backtrack and listen to the Beis Yosef. So why are you not following that practice? And they basically asked the Mabit to retract his psak. The bottom line is, we said that not only is the Heter of Eliezer MiVardin thrown into the equation, but the Heter of the Mabit himself, that when the water comes onto the boat, it should be mutter, is also thrown into the equation. I'm just going to give you an example of where in Tanakh the svara of the Mabit is mentioned. It's a very, very interesting thing. In Sefer Yoina, it says, Vayiru HaMalachim, the sailors were feared. Remember, this is when the storm came onto Yonah's boat. Vayizaku ish el Elohav, each man cried out to his God. Vayatilu es hakelim, asher ba'aniyah, they threw all the vessels off the boat, el hayam, to the sea, lahakel me'aleim, to make the boat lighter. The Yoina, yarad el yarkasei hasfina, Yoina went down, he went down to the bowels of the boat, vayishka vayiradam, he lay down and he went to sleep. So the Malbim wants to know, it says they threw off all the kelim in the aniyah. They threw off all the kelim on the boat. And then it says, Yoina was yarad to the yarkasei hasfina. He went down to the bowels of the sfina. Why at first is it called aniyah? And then in the end it's called sfina. So the Malbim says, you know why Yoina went down to the bottom of the boat? Because first of all, he didn't want to have happen to him what happened to Rabbi Akiva. What does the Gemara say happened to Rabbi Akiva? He was thrown off a boat and he was carried from wave to wave until he landed on the shore. He didn't want that to happen. It says, Amalbin v'haya kavanosai b'asher yaresh shebe'es tit b'hasina, when the boat drowns, v'yipol techayam, and it falls into the sea, yeshev sharos, it's possible, sheyitzav Hashem l'galei hayam, that God would command the waves, sheyatradu migalagah, that it will take him from vessel to vessel, Aj Yushlach El Hayabasha, like the story we had in Ma'im Shein Lam Son Yavamas. L'chein Yorad El Yarkasei Asfina, because there's a Malbim, there's a difference between a Sfina and an Aniyah. The Sfina is the part of the boat that's under the water. It's safan, it's hidden. Shesfina nikra hachelek min Aniyah shu safan u'mechusa lamala. V'hu hacheder hatachdain shebaniyah. That from there you can't fall out into the sea. If you're in the Sfina, Yavayu mei hayam alav v'yid b'Hashem, the water sea will fall on you. Like who? Like what? Listen to this Malbim. K'moi shehiter hamabit. Like the Mabit mattered women whose husbands were in the bowels of the boat, because then it's not mayim she'ein lahem soif, then it's mayim she'yesh lahem soif. So it's very interesting. The Malbim uses this Mabit to explain what Yoina wanted to do. Yoina basically wanted to die. Yoina knew that when you stay on the bottom of the boat and the water comes onto the boat, you're not going to be thrown out into the water. The water, your grave becomes the chamber of the boat. There's no way out. And interesting, the Malbim brings in the Mabit as an explanation for what Yoina was trying to do during that storm. Because Yoina knew that when you stay on the boat, that's not Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. He didn't want to be in a Mayim She'en Lahem Soif because he knew he could be safe from Mayim She'en Lahem Soif. He knew that if you stay on the boat, it becomes Mayim She'esh Lahem Soif. Okay? So this is the contentious halachic issue between the Beis Yosef and the Mabit. But we did say that the Maharit, the son of Mabit, brings down that in the Beis Yosef's final illness, he was Mavarech, the Mabit, on his deathbed. Okay, Rabbi Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.